The next thing that will be helpful to refresh your memory on is how to simplify a square root. So I have some rules written at the bottom of page 1, but I'm just going to jump into an example. So if you go to the top of page 2 in example R2, you see two square roots, and the directions say to simplify each square root, give an exact answer, no decimals. Okay, so we're going to be dealing with the square root of 50 as well as the square root of 72, and mathematically they are not considered simplified. Okay, so you're being asked to simplify these square roots. You're being asked for an exact answer. That means no decimals. Okay, so don't interpret this as I'm going to go punch this into the calculator and get a decimal number. That's not what's going on here. Okay, your answer is still going to have a square root in it, and it may actually look more complicated to you. But by doing this process we're about to do, it is considered mathematically to be simplified. Okay, so let's start with the square root of 50 in part A. Okay, so the first thing you're going to do is you're going to take the number underneath and you're going to build something called a factor tree. Okay, so I'm going to take 50, not the square root of 50, just the number underneath, and I'm going to branch out here and I'm going to try to rewrite 50 as two numbers multiplied together. Okay, so think of two numbers that you multiply together to get 50. Well, we've got 10 and 5, that works. 25 and 2 also works. Okay, you can pick either of these. It doesn't matter which pair you go with, you will end up in the same place at the end of the day. Okay, I'm going to go with 10 and 5. Okay, so 10 times 5 gives me 50. Okay, and then I'm going to go to each of those numbers and see if each number breaks down itself. Okay, so like 10, we can break 10 down into 5 times 2. Okay, and then I need to go over to this number and see if it breaks down. Well, the only way you can break down 5 is 5 times 1. Okay, so we're not even going to bother writing that down. Okay, you stop, if the next step would be, the only way you could break it down would be the number itself in 1. Okay, you don't need to write that. Okay, so we're done here. Okay, if we go, now we've got to check down here because we just wrote 5 times 2. We need to see if either of those breaks down. Well, the only way 5 breaks down is into 5 times 1. Okay, so we're not going to write that down. The only way 2 breaks down is into 2 times 1. So we're not going to write that down. Okay, so we're done making the factor tree, and we are going to circle the numbers at the end of each branch. Okay, so this is what we're going to circle. Okay, if you multiply these numbers together that you've circled, you should get 50. 5 times 2 is 10, times 5 is 50. All right, so here's what we're going to do. Okay, we need to rewrite our square root. Okay, like I said, we're trying to simplify it. Okay, so the square root of 50, that is going to be equal to, okay, I'm going to put my square root symbol. Underneath, I am going to write the numbers that I circled in the factor tree. And when you do this, I recommend that you organize them. Write the numbers in ascending order and put pairs next to each other. Okay, so I'm going to write 2 times 5 times 5. Okay, on both sides of the equal sign, we have 50 underneath the square root. Okay, 2 times 5 is 10, times 5 is 50. Okay, all right, so now we're going to start simplifying the square root. Okay, this is what you do. Okay, I'm going to write the square root. Okay, underneath, you need to look for pairs. Okay, well, I have a pair of 5s. Okay, so what you're going to do anytime you encounter a pair is you're going to take one of them out. Okay, so I'm going to have a pair of 5s. One of the 5s comes out from under the square root. And then I'm done with the pair and I can scratch it out. Okay, what's really going on there, underneath the radical you had 5 times 5, so you really had the square root of 25, and the square root of 25 is just 5. Okay, so that's what was happening there. Okay, the 2 is lonely, it's not paired up with anything, so it just stays under the square root. Okay, and you're done. Okay, so the square root of 50 is the same thing as 5 times the square root of 2. Okay? You can actually go to a calculator to see this. Okay? If you go to your calculator and you type in the square root of 50, you get 7.07 dot dot dot. And then if you type in 5 square root of 2, you get the same exact decimal expansion. Okay, so they are the same number, even though they look different. Okay, mathematically speaking, 5 times the square root of 2 is considered simplified, whereas the square root of 50 is not simplified. Okay, so this is going to be the final answer here. Okay. All right, let's try this again on the square root of 72. Okay, we're going to try to simplify that guy. Okay, so I'm going to come over here and write its factor tree. So the first pair of numbers that come to my mind, 8 and 9. Okay, 8 times 9 is 72. Okay, we've got to go to each of those numbers and see if we can break them down. Okay, 8 breaks down into 2 times 4. 9 breaks down into 3 times 3. And then now we've got to check each of these numbers, okay? 2 only breaks down into 2 times 1, so we're going to leave it alone. 4 breaks down into 2 times 2. 3 only breaks down into 3 times 1, so I'm going to leave it alone. And then the other 3 also breaks down into 3 times 1, so I'm going to leave it alone, okay? Now I'm done, or I guess I should have checked, technically I should have checked the 2 times 2 down here, but again, each of those numbers is just going to break down into 2 times 1. Okay, so we're done. We're going to circle the numbers at the ends of the branches. Okay, and if we multiply these numbers together, we should get 72. 2 times 2 is 4, times 2 is 8, times 3 is 24, times 3 is 72. Okay, so now we're going to go and rewrite the square root of 72 using these numbers. Okay, I'm going to put my square root sign. Okay, and remember what I said, it helps if you organize your numbers. Write them in ascending order, make sure all the pairs are together. So we're going to have 2 times 2 times 2 times 3 times 3. On both sides of the equal sign, we have 72 underneath the square root. Okay, all right, now we look for pairs. Okay, I see a pair of 2's. Okay, so 1, 2 is going to come outside of the square root. Okay, so I'm going to cross out that pair because I'm done with it. Okay, then I also have a pair of 3's. Okay, so one of the 3's will come out, and then I'm scratching out the pair because I'm done with it. Okay, and then underneath your square root, there's 1, 2 left that's all by itself. So it stays because you can't pair it up with anything. Okay, so every number underneath the square root has been accounted for. Outside of the square root, we have 2 and 3. They get multiplied together. Okay, so the square root of 72 is going to be the same thing as 6 times the square root of 2. Okay, and we are done. Okay, again, you can confirm this on the calculator. If you go and punch in the square root of 72, here's the decimal expansion you get. And then if you type in its simplified version, which is 6 times the square root of 2, you get the same decimal expansion. Okay, so you know they are the same number, but again, 6 times the square root of 2 is considered to be the simplified version. So here is your answer. Okay, so why is this going to be relevant when we're working with circles? Well, the reason is sometimes the radius of your circle will be a square root. Okay, so you have to know what you can and what you can't do with square roots. Okay, and it does help to know how to simplify a square root, because again, oftentimes the radius of your circle will be a number that's a square root. That's the square root of some number.